All right, so we are on mantra number 16 and 17 from the Shri Isopanishad. By the way, next week, as I know Madhavendra will forget, I've told him like 6 times, to start recording after the kirtan. Because, just in case in the future devotees actually want to watch these videos, which I hope they will, and even if they don't, we want to have a principle of when you click on the video, it gets right at the beginning of the class, not like 10 minutes of, how you doing and how's the weather over there in Stockholm and, blah, blah, blah. And then like a 10-minute kirtan, and you have to like scroll forward, right? So he recorded, I forgot to record today, so who am I to tell anyone what to do? But the point is we're really trying to record these just at the beginning of the actual class, right after the kirtan. And okay, so mantras, do you prefer mantra 16 or mantra 17, like personally?
In preference, meaning like which one we liked better?
Yeah, which one do you prefer?
I like the description of Krishna in mantra 16. I like that it calls him the primeval philosopher. I thought that was rather interesting.
That is funny. Primeval philosopher. Okay, so let's go to our questions, which you all answered quite well. There's a few things I was looking for that some of you caught, some of you didn't, but overall it was good. But before even doing that, let's actually read the verse. So I'll read the Sanskrit, and then let's see who, perhaps Jacob, since you're on top of the list here on my view here, you can read the translation and even the purport. All right. Pumshan ekarsha yama surya prajapatya vyuha rashmin samuha tejo yatte rupam kalyanatamam tate pashyami yo sav aso purusha soham asmi. Yeah. I don't know. What? Yeah, I don't know does anyone know what the meter for this? Not even a Brahman Samhita. Pumsan ekarsha yama surya. I don't know. It's a long one. Anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
Sure. Translation. O my Lord, O primeval philosopher, maintainer of the universe, O regulating principle, destination of the pure devotees, well-wisher of the progenitors of mankind, please remove the effulgence of your transcendental rays so that I can see your form of bliss. You are the eternal supreme personality of Godhead, like unto the sun, as am I. Shall I report?
Let's see which. There's actually one purport in particular that I want us to read, which is the living entities are also okay. So it's basically kind of towards the lower end. It's like basically 3 paragraphs up from the end. The living entities, because this touches. We might as well talk about something that's actually is being debated and has always been debated. But right now there's some interesting conversations on Namrasa's late morning program podcast. And I think that this paragraph here, as well as read it, actually kind of has to do with the fall of the soul, the issue of the origin of the soul. And I've got a few things to say on that, especially, since this paragraph seems to kind of touch upon it, at least indirectly. So go ahead, read the living entities are also differentiated expansions of the Lord's self, and because some of them
desire to be lords and imitate the Supreme Lord, he allows them to enter into the cosmic creation with the option to fully utilize their propensity to lord it over nature. Because of the presence of his parts and parcels, the living entities, the entire phenomenal world is stirred into action and reaction. Thus, the living entities are given full facilities to lord it over material nature. But the ultimate controller is the Lord himself in his plenary feature as Paramatma, the super soul, who is one of the Purushas.
So I just wanted to, to touch on this point that the Lord allows them to enter the cosmic creation with the option to fully utilize their propensity to lord it over nature, right? Are you Prabhu's familiar with the like the debate about the souls, like where do the souls come from and stuff, or not?
So it's the fall of the jiva
Yeah.
debate. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm like very familiar with it, but I've heard some devotees speak on it.
I mean, since we're on the topic, why don't we? I said, huh, Golokananda?
They come in the form of rain and come into grain.
Yeah, that's how souls like enter into material bodies. But we're talking about the origin of the soul. Like how did the soul get in the material world in the first place?
Whether or not it originated in the spiritual world, right?
Or in Goloka Vrindavan, yeah, or in Vaikuntha.
They want to act independently. They don't want to, they want to lord over material nature, and they don't want to, to be with the Lord.
Right. So you're assuming by your sentence here, by your statement, they don't want to be with the Lord. So you're assuming that we souls are with the Lord. And I believe that. My Shiksha gurus believe that. I think Prabhupada taught that, and I think that's the Siddhanta. But you'd be surprised by how many devotees in ISKCON, and especially in the Gaudiya Maths, plural, have this idea that souls, that there's two categorically different kinds of souls. Some that are with Krishna in the spiritual world, and some that have never been. And they come from some so-called marginal region, which actually doesn't exist. There's no such thing as a marginal region. There's a marginal nature, which is us. Like we are marginal by nature, according to the Bhagavad-Gita, according to Krishna's teachings. We are marginal by nature, but it's not like there's a neighborhood out there called the marginal area, or the marginal neighborhood, or the marginal region. And in that neighborhood, in that area, there's souls who live there. And somehow they just kind of get injected into the material world and basically are going to Goloka Vrindavan or to Vaikuntha for the first time ever. And many Vaishnavas, Gaudiya Vaishnavas, believe that like souls that we are basically going to Goloka for the very first time. And there's others who say no, the soul does fall from the spiritual world, from the highest place in the spiritual world, from an intimate relationship with Krishna. And so the reason I thought this is interesting, because in connection to this passage here, is that Krishna talks about this, and just like Golokananda, she mentioned this, because of this desire to be independent of the Lord, of the Lord. And Prabhupada says it right here, because of them desire to be lords and imitate the Supreme Lord, he allows them to enter into the cosmic creation, right? And so there's another thing to clarify. There's two types of entries into this material world. There's one that everybody agrees on, and that is, as you know, the universe is created and then absorbed into the body of who? Mahavishnu, right? With every breath that Mahavishnu breathes out, all the souls that are in his body, dormant, come out, right? Along with all the universes. And when he breathes back in, they're sucked back in. Now, some of them, while he's breathing out, become Krishna conscious and escape and go back to the spiritual world. They don't, but those who just are really stubborn, they go back into the body of Mahavishnu. But there's another fall, which is, which is what many devotees seem to believe is the fact, is then that is the idea that there's an original fall from Vaikuntha into the material world. Leaving Krishna's personal association, or leaving Vishnu's personal association. And then, falling to the material world. And then, if they don't want to go back to Godhead, then they get reabsorbed into Mahavishnu's body, into the Mahatattva, right? And that can just go on for a lot of creations and dissolutions and creations and dissolutions. But so you see, so there's two types of injections of the soul into the material world. There's the original one, the original sin, because we ate that apple, and because we believe the material world itself, is manifested and unmanifested and manifested and unmanifested. What happens to those souls who still want to lord it over material nature when the material nature is unmanifested? Well, they're reabsorbed into the body of Mahavishnu, right? And they're just kind of laying there dormant till he breathes out again. And then when he breathes out again, then they're, by his glands, they're re-injected into where they were in the last creation, and they start off from where they lasted, when they were last reabsorbed, with their same material desires. Krishna, Prabhupada says here that the living entities, he allows them to enter into the cosmic creation with the option to fully utilize their propensity to lord it over nature. Because of the presence of his parts and parcels, the living entities, the entire phenomenal world is stirred into action and reaction. In other words, this whole material world is really here to to give a facility to us rebellious souls. Thus, the living entities are given full facilities to lord it over material nature, but the ultimate controller is the Lord himself in his plenary feature as Paramatma. Now, why is this also interesting? We might as well just do a quick but pretty thorough, I would say, overview of this issue. And for that, do you, Prabhus, have access to the Bhagavatam? And you'll see why I want to talk about this verse from the Bhagavatam, especially in relationship to Paramatma, to the super soul. Does any of you have?
I have why did the soul who were in the spiritual world originally, but they want to come down here? How did they got this desire to?
Well, the desire, we would say, is inherent. It's not like it's the onus ultimately is on the free will of the jiva. The onus, you can choose, like, the Maya has to be there in order for the soul to be tempted. But not necessarily. The soul can, because he's really independent, desire, he has free will. Free will by definition means, okay, I don't want to serve you. Do you have access to the Bhagavatam?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so please go to the Bhagavatam, and I want you to go to the fourth chapter, fourth canto, chapter 28, and it's verse. Hold on. Verse 58, if I'm not mistaken. Are you there?
Yeah.
58, 428, 58. Right?
Yep.
So can Sorel, can you read 428, 58? Just the verse.
Give me one moment. Sorry, I pulled up the wrong one.
Oh.
Almost there.
Golokananda Priya? Do you have it?
Yeah, I have it. It said the 5 stores are the 5 working sensory organs.
428, 58?
Yeah.
428,
That's what I have
58.
also, 428:58.
Yeah.
5 source are the 5 working sensory organs. That's the way it starts.
Wait.
Yeah.
Because I'm looking at it right now. Maybe it was quoted wrong. I was just cutting and pasting, so it couldn't have been my mistake. But do you know the story of Puranjana, right? Who doesn't know the story of Puranjana
I'm not familiar with it.
I'm not.
at all?
Not really.
No.
Okay, so basically Puranjana. Okay, in brief, I'll tell you the story real brief. Okay, so you get the context. Because this is a really, we do believe that the Srimad Bhagavatam ultimately is our ultimate authority. We have, what are the 3 sources of knowledge?
Sadhu, Shastra, and
YouTube, Fox News, CNN, Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, right?
Yeah.
And out of the 3, where does the buck stop?
Shastra.
Shastra. Okay. That's really important. Like, for example, Sorel, that distinguishes us from, let's say, sort of, Mayavadi groups, for example, where the only authority is the guru and the buck stops at what the guru said, right? In our tradition, we really take seriously what the guru says, but we always corroborate what the guru says
The Shastra.
to Shastra. Shastra is where the buck ends. And among all Shastras, for us, the ultimate Shastra is the Bhagavatam. Lord Chaitanya declares it as, the Amala Purana, the spotless Purana, our ultimate authority. So on the topic of the fall of the soul, it's important for you guys to be well informed of, key verses from Shastra, not from, commentaries, although of course they're important, but I'm not talking about the commentaries or the writings of Jiva Goswami or Bhaktivinoda Thakur or Bhaktisiddhanta or Prabhupada. We're talking, going to the source on this topic in Shastra. And this passage right here is the passage par excellence in the entire Srimad Bhagavatam on this topic, right? So it's a few stories. First, it's an allegorical story. Narada Muni talks to this really materialistic king, and he tells him about a king. Like, basically, he's talking about him, but the guy's so puffed up that he doesn't want to talk about him. He doesn't want to criticize him directly. So he's like, hey, did you ever hear about the story of King Prachitambarhishat? But he's actually, he means to critique that king, but he's doing it indirectly. So actually, the king is called Prachitambarhishat, and so Narada Muni tells him about King Puranjana. And this Puranjana is actually the embodied soul. And so the whole chapter 27 describes about how the soul finds a palace and goes into it, the soul entering into a physical body. And there he's got all these gates. He's got 9 gates or whatever. And then he falls in love with this queen who's, if I'm not mistaken, considered to be seen as the false ego or Maya. And so as time goes on, there's these enemies that come on the actual palace, time and old age and death. And finally, as much as Puranjana tries to ward off these enemies, they enter into the gates and kill him, and destroy the palace. In other words, death. The story goes on. Narada Muni continues and tells, sort of chapter 2 of this allegorical story. This King Puranjana, who's the soul, takes birth, as the daughter of a king, and her name is the daughter of King Vidarbha. Okay, and so what happens is that she grows up. He tells the king, and she gets married to a king, a very pious king called King Mayaladvaj, and they get married and they live, their life in Krishna consciousness. And towards the end of his life, this king goes to the forest to, sort of vanaprastha and meditate on Vishnu. And Narada Muni says that this queen, who used to be Puranjana in her past life, accompanies her husband to the forest. And there one day, as they're doing their usual, thing. By the way, did any of you read that new novel by Rita Anandamaharaj called Justin? It's pretty good, huh?
Yeah.
Did you like it?
Yeah.
Sukuma.
It was interesting how he kind of weaved the Asura invasion into it, like in a modern.
Yeah, totally. So back to the story. I mentioned that because there's scenes of forests in that book, and I was just kind of brought there. So then one day, as this wife is massaging her husband's feet, she notices that he's all cold, like the body's all cold. And then she realizes, the text tells us, or Narada Muni tells the king, that he left his body, right? And so she's like freaking out because she loves him, and he just died, and now she's all alone in this forest. Let me share the screen with you. We can read it together. So here you see text 46. While she was serving her husband by massaging his legs, she could feel that his feet were no longer warm and could thus understand that he had already passed from the body. She felt great anxiety upon being left alone. Bereft of her husband's company, she felt exactly as the deer feels upon being separated from its mate. Being now alone and a widow in that forest, the daughter of Vidarbha began to lament, incessantly shedding tears, which soaked her breasts and crying very loudly. And she was telling her husband, "Oh, best of kings, please get up, get up. Just see this world surrounded by water and infested with rogues and so-called kings. This world is very much afraid, and it is your duty to protect her." That most obedient wife thus fell down at the feet of her dead husband and began to cry pitifully in that solitary forest. Thus the tears rolled down from her eyes. She then prepared a blazing fire with firewood and placed the dead body of her husband on it. When this was finished, she lamented severely and prepared herself to perish in the fire with her husband. And here we go now. Here we go. This is where the key section comes in. My dear king, one Brahmana, who was an old friend of King Puranjana, that means, an old friend of the queen in her past life, came to that place and began to pacify the queen with sweet words. The Brahmana inquired as follows: "Who are you? Whose wife or daughter are you? Who is the man lying here? It appears you are lamenting for this dead body. And now, here we go. Don't you recognize me? I am your eternal friend. You may remember that many times in the past you have consulted me. My dear friend, even though you could not immediately recognize me, can't you remember that in the past you and I had a very intimate friend? Intimate friend. Unfortunately, you gave up my company. I mean, these are really personal terms. Company, right? Friend, intimate. And you accepted a position as enjoyer in this material world. My dear gentle friend, both you and I are exactly like two swans. We live together in the same heart, which is just like the Manasa lake. Although we have been living together for many thousands of years, we are still far away from our original home. So you see, here we've got Paramatma talking. I mean, we're going to go into the purports, but just so you know, the commentaries say that this Brahmana is actually Krishna, or is actually Vishnu, is actually Paramatma speaking, right? And living together like two swans makes you remember this idea that, in every body there's two souls, right? There's the individual soul and the supreme soul, or Paramatma, right? But what's interesting here, it says, remember I talked about these two falls, right? The original fall of the soul, as many of us believe, and then, the hanging around in one material body after the other with Paramatma right next to us, life after life after life, and even, cosmic manifestation after cosmic manifestation. So here you can see that's illustrated by this point. Although we have been living together for many thousands of years, or maybe thousands of lifetimes, or maybe thousands of cosmic creations and dissolutions, we are still far away from our original home, right?
That's the same language that Prabhupada uses, over and over again when he says, back home, back to Godhead.
Right.
What else would that mean?
Right. Now, what's interesting is that some commentators say, well, okay, but, it doesn't say okay, but some commentators, and that's picked up by certain devotees, say that, well, that's referring to Paramatma, so that doesn't prove that the soul was with Krishna in the spiritual world, right? But here I want you guys to read a very short counter argument, which I think is really great, by Hridayananda Maharaj on this topic. And so are you seeing this here that I'm highlighting or not? Or do I have to share again? You see it?
You see Veda base only.
Do you see Vedabase, or do you see what you're seeing?
Database.
Oh, okay, so hold on. Let me then new share. Right here, boom. Now you see this, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So these are the words by Sri Dynamite. So, just I'm not asking you to believe this, but I'm asking you to at least be conscious of the position of those who claim that the soul does come from Goloka Vrindavan,
Hmm.
right? At least you'll be equipped with knowledge of the key verses in the ultimate authority of the Vaishnavas, which surpasses any writing of any acharya in our entire parampara, because every acharya is supposed to refer us ultimately to Shastra, right? So there's 2 points that Maharaj makes which I think are really good. Jacob, why don't you read the first one in black, and I'll read the one in blue, or someone else can read it.
Sure. There is an obvious reason why Srimad Bhagavatam 4:28-58 is not merely referring to the Paramatma. The soul is not accompanied by Paramatma until after the soul has come to this world.
Right. So this is an interesting point. Right. Oh, sorry. He elaborates in the next sentence. Go ahead.
There is no Paramatma in Vaikuntha, as far as we know.
Right. So if I may interrupt you, like in the Krishna book, you don't hear about, the residents of Goloka Vrindavan having Vishnu right next to them, right? Paramatma really is an avatar of the Lord for the material world, right? For souls who are in the material world. Go ahead.
So it makes no sense to claim that the Paramatma says to a soul who is already in the material world that you rejected me and came to this material world. Yet that is precisely what the Lord says.
Right? So here, the Lord is saying, or that Brahman is saying, you rejected me, you left me and you became an enjoyer in the material world. So, right? Why would Paramatma say that? Now, go ahead.
We should recall the word Paramatma is used 2 ways: to indicate the Lord's presence in the heart of an already fallen, conditioned soul, and to literally indicate the Supreme Soul. And that's what the word literally means. Many Sanskrit words in Shastra are used in various ways.
So you see, this is really important. Who is the Supreme Soul?
Krishna.
Yeah. And is there a difference between Vishnu and Krishna in the ultimate sense? Like, do we believe in 2 gods, or are we monotheists?
Yeah, one.
There's ultimately is one. Like, is Krishna, is Balaram eternally, ontologically, like wholly different from Krishna?
That's
No.
what polygamy portion means, right?
It's the same Supreme Lord who, by his own sweet will, expands himself into his own brother and has fun with him and plays and stuff. But ultimately, we're talking about one Supreme Lord, right? And so let me read this part 2, right? So Sri Dynamite says, there's one statement which we often hear: the Brahman in the parable is Paramatma, not Bhagavan Krishna, right? That's the argument I've told you. So if the translations are correct, they would still not support literal anadi, but also not the opposite interpretation. So literal anadi means since time immemorial, like since time immemorial, right? So some say, well, that proves that the soul there's some souls that literally have never been in the material world. They're eternally not in the material world, right? But acharyas have seen and have shown that this word anadi means it's so long, like the soul has left the spiritual world so long ago that basically it's been here forever, but it's not literally here forever. Right? So that's a key word in the debate, anadi. So we must keep in mind that Bhagavan and Paramatma are the same person, not 2 different persons. Lord Krishna says repeatedly in the Gita that he is in the heart of all, right? And that's really interesting, because in Bhagavad-Gita 15:15, right? Sarvasya chaham ridi sanivishto. Like and this is Krishna, this is 2-handed Krishna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, right? It's not Vishnu speaking. I mean, it is in one way because they're the same, but there it's like it's Krishna speaking to Arjuna, and he says, I am in the heart of everyone. So that verse right there because Krishna also says that in 1861, but interestingly enough, in 1861, he says, Ishvara sarvabhutanam hridesya arjuna tishtati. The Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart. He's speaking about himself in the third person. So we could use that verse and say, well, you see, even there in 1861, he's talking about Paramatma. But in 1515, he's saying aham, right? Sarvasya chaham hridi sanivishto. Yeah, sarvasya chaham, cha aham hridi in the heart, sanivishto, I. So it's Krishna, two-handed Krishna with the flute, telling Arjuna, I'm in the heart of everyone, right? So that shows right there, like there's no difference ultimately between Paramatma or Vishnu and Krishna. Also, in chapter 11, Arjuna asks Krishna to show his four-handed form, which is a form of Krishna. To me, the issue of whether we fall from Krishna Loka or Vaikuntha, right, whether we reject Sri Krishna or Sri Vishnu is less important. The real point is that we come to this world, right, the original fall, because we reject the Lord, who is our real friend. This is absolutely clear in the literal Sanskrit, or in the literal sense of the Sanskrit word from that chapter. So coming back, let us go back to our.
Prabhuji, I have a question.
Yeah,
could you?
Yeah, could you hold it though? Could you hold a second, just so we can conclude and come back to that verse?
Okay.
I won't forget. I promise you. Just want to go back to our verse here, or to that paragraph, which I find interesting, where Krishna says, right, are you back there in that third paragraph from the end of mantra 16? Right?
Yeah.
The Lord allows them to enter into the cosmic creation, right? And at the end, he says, right, this is the ultimate controller is the Lord himself in his plenary feature of Paramatma, which is one of the Purushas. I don't know, for me, I felt inspired to deal with this issue of like Krishna versus Paramatma, or they're different. The Acharyas say it's Paramatma, but ultimately Paramatma and Krishna are the same. And Krishna himself says, I'm in the heart of everyone. And the so-called Paramatma, which also, as we can see, can be translated as literally great soul, not necessarily the super soul in everyone's heart, but the great soul with a capital G, which refers to the Supreme Lord, Krishna, is speaking in the form of the Brahman and saying, hey, we've had, you, just to finish, we've been together for a long time and we have an intimate relationship, and you left me to become an enjoyer in this material world. For me, just to finish, these verses and the logic you just heard here makes me, at least, and I'm not saying what you should do, but for me, I've taken that position that the soul does come from Goloka, and we are going back home, back to Godhead, literally. Yes, what were you going to say, Sukumari?
I just wanted to ask if you could share with us that portion from Radhananda Maharaj.
Yeah.
That we can read that. That was a bit quick for me. That would be nice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
One thing, are you done, Sukumari? Sorry.
Yes.
Okay. Well, one thing is that the Paramatma doesn't exist in the spiritual world. So it exists only in the material world.
What'd you say?
The living was falling down.
What'd you say?
The Paramatma doesn't exist in the spiritual world.
Right.
But he always, exists in this material world with a living entity. So if they're non-different, so why he didn't live in the spiritual world?
I don't know. Ask him. I mean, his function as as the Lord in the heart is to follow the living entity until the living entity turns to him, right?
Okay.
So anyway, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I think you've got basically a good. If you have this, I just sent it to you on WhatsApp. You got the reference, 428, 50 or so moving forward. Those are the key verses from the Bhagavatam. So when someone says to you, well, hey, and if you like the argument, here that basically there's no difference ultimately between, we are monotheists and Krishna and Vishnu are the same, and Krishna himself says, I'm in the heart of everyone in the Bhagavad-Gita and so on, then these verses are really the key shastric references for the fall of the soul position. All right, so let us go back to our questions. All right.
Any other conclusion from those verses?
Anyway,
just any other conclusion other than what you have stated just reminds me of, reading Shastra and drawing an impersonal conclusion from it. It's like, how could you possibly come up with that? It's like, it's just concoction, it's, it seems very clear that it's not, that we did exist in the spiritual world with Krishna and that we have fallen according to our Shastras.
Yeah, we can't also make too much fun of, at least, the interpretation, because the argument that it's Paramatma speaking, that's a statement made by one of the acharyas, like by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur or someone, so.
Mhm.
So we can't minimize that he says it's but then again, what sort of Paramatma is he talking about? Is he talking about the Paramatma that goes into the heart of every living entity as the Lord in the heart, as we say, or is he talking about Paramatma, like the great soul, the great Lord, which is just Krishna, period, or Vishnu, period, in Vaikuntha? Okay, let us continue, because we'll take a break in about 10 minutes, and there's another interesting point that I want to talk about in this verse. So can we go on? Are we kind of good with that?
Yes.
Everybody answered the idea that the idea of removing the transcendental rays so that you could see the form of the Lord. For those of you who know the Bhagavad-Gita, what really important verse in the Bhagavad-Gita talks about how Krishna and Krishna's form is hidden and can only really be understood by a particular process? And what is that process? Even if you don't know the verse reference, this you should know. What's the process by which we understand God the person, not just the impersonal realization? Sorel or Sukumari or Golokananda?
Devotional service.
Yeah, bhakti. Right? He was pretty obvious one. It's by bhakti. It's by devotion that Krishna reveals his intimate self, his person to us. Another question, you may or may not know the reference. In the first canto of the Bhagavatam, in the famous prayers by Queen Kunti, he describes Krishna as being who on what?
Krishnaya Vasudevaya Devakinanda. Is that it?
He's an actor
Exactly, Sukumari got it.
on a stage.
As an
probably.
actor on the stage. That's covered by what? By
I
a,
don't know.
or what is before the play starts, what's the stage?
Curtain.
By a curtain. A curtain of illusion. There's one verse that one of my Shiksha gurus, Brigupati Prabhu, likes to quote a lot, and which I also like to quote, which Prabhupada quotes a lot in his purports. It's Atakshi Krishna Nam Adi Na Bhavid Grayam Indriyai Sevon Mukhe Hi Jivado Svayam Evaspuratyada. Shri Krishna, Nam, his name, Adi, etc. So the form of Shri Krishna, Krishna himself, that cool flute player, Shri Krishna, his name, etc. Na bhavid grayam indriya. What does indriya mean? The indriyas, the senses. So Krishna, in his personal form, cannot be understood by the blunt material senses. The curtain is covering our vision from him. The effulgence, like we're seeing here, the effulgence is so brilliant that all we see is the effulgence. So there's this idea that the personal form of God is just invisible to us, whether it's a effulgence that's keeping us from seeing him, or whether it's, an illusion of a curtain of illusion. The idea is that our senses cannot perceive the personal form of the Lord. But sevon muke, seva. What does seva means?
Service.
Service. Seva. Sevon muke hi jivado, starting with the tongue. So it's important to eat prasadam and to, of course, to chant the holy name. So starting with taking prasadam, starting with this tongue, by rendering service, starting with the tongue, svayam eva spuratyada, then that personal form, Krishna, reveals himself to us, right? And so here, this devotee is speaking, in the mood of devotion, in the mood of love, and he's like, please, I understand that you're a person, so please remove that effulgence. I don't care about the effulgence. I want to see you, I want to see you eye to eye, right? Now, as a side note, as you know, there's a lot of scientists who are very materialistic in the sense of giving a totally sort of reductionistic, physicalist explanation of the world. It's all neurons and protons, it's all matter, it's all physics, right? Chemistry, and even consciousness can be explained by the laws of chemistry and physics and biology, right? But there are a good deal of scientists out there too, including famous ones who, like even Pierre and Marie Curie, for example, the famous inventors of what were they, of the process of pasteurization, and they did other things. It's less known, or almost not known at all, that for some time they were doing serious experiments on people who had psychic powers, especially mediums, who could like read your mind, or who could, lift things off, objects off tables, or like the sort of stuff you hear about. Why am I saying this? Because there's one particular book which I've read, and it's a compilation. It's a sort of it's one of those academic books where it's different articles written by different professors with a team that's sort of compiling the whole thing. It's called Beyond Physicalism. Now, trust me, I'm getting somewhere here. And in this book, Beyond Physicalism, they give an overview of all the sort of rogue, you know what a rogue is? Like a rebel? The rogue phenomena out there that doesn't fit into the conventionally accepted paradigm of modern science. So precisely, telekinesis, levitation, appearing in two places at the same time, reading someone's mind, children who claim to remember their past lives, out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, UFOs, stigmata, bleeding from the hand, and all this sort of stuff. And what's really interesting and frustrating, but actually interesting and actually faith-building, in my opinion, is that when these guys, and the subtitle of this book is, bridging science with spirituality, right? I'll show you the book. If you're interested in this stuff, I really recommend it. It's a wonderful book, really, really good. Beyond Physicalism. Beyond Physicalism. And you'll see where I'm getting at. Beyond Physical, here we go. Boom, let me share this. Zoom, share screen. Here we go. Beyond Physicalism towards reconciliation of science and spirituality. Okay? It's a pretty thick book. And in the conclusion of this book, we'll see. In the conclusion of the book, lo and behold, and to us it's like, duh, like, yup, we could almost predict it. All right, what verse was I just talking about just before? Like this, Atta Shri Krishna Mandi, etc. What's the conclusion of that?
It's only by using the tongue or something, and the senses.
Through
Yeah, we
serving
can-
Krishna is the only way to understand his personal form.
Exactly. And up to that, you can only get to where? Like, what are the aspects of the absolute truth we believe that people without practicing bhakti can attain?
Brahman and Paramatma.
Paramatma.
Exactly, especially Brahman, right? We don't say that you need bhakti to understand Brahman. As a matter of fact, a lot of Mayavadis, right, they meditate on Brahman and then they experience Brahman, right? But that little boy with the flute, eating butter with his teenage friends, that's beyond their conception. And so in the efforts of some broad-minded scientists, here you see in chapter 10, conscious body, mind and body, and Abhinavagupta. Abhinavagupta was a famous Mayavadi philosopher, and he's quoted a lot in academic circles. And here, if you actually read this, like chapter 14, towards a worldview grounded in science and spirituality, the author basically says, yeah, there's some sort of impersonal, kind of like the movie, the Avatar, some sort of conscious it that's pervading everything, kind of the force of the Jedis, it's just sort of like this all-pervading, non-personal energy, or what we'd say, Brahman. And it's like, okay, that's fine, dude, but there's actually the Supreme Person. There's a realization of the Supreme Person, but because you're using your senses and you're using them well, you can only go to the limit of your calculations and observations and mental speculations and meditations, which is the impersonal Brahman. And that's why you conclude that that Kashmiri Shaivism, which is basically Mayavadi philosophy, is probably the paradigm in spirituality that can encompass and explain and reconciliate all these rogue phenomena of science. And so for us, it's like seeing a football, like, in a soccer, when you play soccer, the ball all like gets to the goal line, but stops just before the goal line. So it's like no cigar, congratulations, but no, you don't you didn't get your goal because the ball didn't roll over that line, right? So in a similar way, it's like these guys are doing a lot of efforts, but it's like this Atakshi Krishna Nabadi, the curtain covering the actor, and you can only get so far. So in a way, it's sort of predictable, according to our philosophy, that they don't conclude that, hey, actually, you know what? All of these rogue phenomena, the conclusion is that God plays the flute and his girlfriend's called Radharani. Duh, that's obvious. No, it's not. and we shouldn't be surprised that they don't get to that. Now we kind of have to say kudos to Christians and creationists, like Christian creationists or Christian scientists, because even though they don't conceive of God as the flute player in Goloka Vrindavan with the cows and the cowherd boys, they still accept that believe that there's a supreme person out there, a supreme creator, and that in a sense is like, that kind of is almost like testimony to the strength of bhakti, that even if you have a bhakti that's, operating in a theological paradigm, which we would say, without being too offensive or insulting, is not really that sophisticated and has a lot of flaws philosophically, still, because we could, speculate, I think rationally, that because bhakti is so strong and it's just so much the inherent nature of the soul, that even though, it's operating again in with the text like the Bible, which is like so limited compared to the Bhagavatam and so on, still, because bhakti is so strong, it still manages to conceive that there's got to be a person behind here, there's got to be a supreme person. I like the analogy of, like you have little plants that grow through cement. They manage to find cracks, and even, and that's why you see little creepers, little shrubs growing through like cracks in cement on pavement, on the sidewalk. Like they'll find that light, they'll find that opening. So bhakti will find a worldview where there's a supreme person behind it all, and Krishna reciprocates.
I think the Christian are very, very much Krishna consciousness. They're always thinking of God. So they're always praying. So they're always like thinking of God.
Yeah, in a personal sense, right? In a personal sense.
Yeah.
Okay, Prabhus, let us take a break here, and we'll take 5-10 minutes, and then we'll tackle mantra 17. Okay? I'll pause the recording. If one of you can remind me to start the recording again when we meet up again. Jai Haribo. Okay, so we're reading mantra number 17 now, and Golokananda Priya Devi Dasi is about to read the translation.
Okay. Let this temporary body be burned to ashes. Let the air of life be merged with the totality of air. Now, O my Lord, please remember all my sacrifices. And because you are the ultimate beneficiary, please remember all that I have done for you.
Let me ask you a really pleasant and really like upbeat, fresh, light question. Do you all like want to be cremated when you die, or do you want to be buried?
Cremated.
Cremated.
Definitely.
For science.
Cremated.
Doesn't matter. Sorel, would you say cremated?
No, I said I want to give my body for science, so whatever the heck they want to do with it.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Temporary body be burned to ashes. That reminds me of when I brought my mom's ashes to Mayapur. Whew. That was intense, man. Like she wasn't much of a devotee, even though I tried. But she did write in her will that she wanted me to bring her ashes to Mayapur. So I had this urn, and I spilled it in the plane. No, I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding. But you've seen like movies or jokes of that. Like the thing blows up. Unfortunately, it didn't spill. And I remember I brought it to Mayapur. And speaking of, I'll tell you a quick anecdote here, because we're talking about mystic powers and rogue scientific phenomena. Well, here my mom definitely was an example of rogue phenomena. Like before she passed away, well, I'll tell you, 2 times actually she appeared to 2 different devotees. Once when she was in a coma, like a day or 2 before dying, and then next time, like exactly the moment when I put her ashes in the Ganges. I remember I went there with a couple of friends and Jananivas from Mayapur, and put the ashes in a big clay pot, and with honey and sesame seeds and yogurt, and then I walked into Mother Ganga with the pot as far as I could get, and when I got to about here, I let go of it, And I remember there was like a little pinch in the heart when that happened.
It's so fortunate to have a son like you to do all this. Very nice.
Before she passed away, there was a devotee in Mayapur that she never met. Nishinga, I forgot his name, from Poland. See, yeah, what'd you say?
Nishinga Chaitanya.
Nishinga Chaitanya, he's from Poland, right? An old-time devotee.
Oh no, sorry, I'm wrong. Sorry.
So he had training. He was a professional nurse for terminally ill cancer patients, and I had, my mom had even toyed with the idea of leaving her body in India. And so when she had told me the idea, I was like really ecstatic about her maybe dying in Mayapur. And so this devotee told me, hey, well, if you want to tell your mom that I can make my house available for her and I can take care of her professionally until she leaves her body. So they never met. She didn't pass away in Mayapur. But the next day, and I don't even know if he knew I was in Mayapur. I certainly didn't see him the day before. The next day, he told me, and I put her ashes in the water and the Ganges at around noontime. And the next day, he said to me, he said, Chandrasekhar, yesterday at around noon, I was taking a nap, and your mom appeared to me in a dream while I was sleeping. And she said, I regret I made mistakes in my life, and above all, I wish I had trusted the devotees more. And then like a month later, or no, a few weeks later when I came back to Europe, the devotee, Murlidhar, a brahmachari then from Switzerland, who had gone to the hospital where my mom was and had chanted with another devotee in her room while she was in a coma and had slept in the car that night just outside the hospital. He told me, he said, you know, after I did a kirtan in your mom's room and she was in the coma, we slept in the car, and 3 times that same night she appeared to me in a dream, and the same dream, it was the same story. I walked into her same hospital room, but this time she was awake and sitting up in her bed, and she had a big smile, and she pressed my hand in hers and would tell me, I'm so happy that you were here. So I don't know how we got to that topic, but
Psychic phenomena.
yeah, the phenomena.
So your mom was always favorable with Krishna consciousness after you joined?
Yeah. I mean, she was favorable, but no, she was also she was influenced by people who, told her, be careful of your money, and this is a cult, and your son has joined a cult. And she was also genuinely resentful that I, had dropped out of college, and her best friend told me one day, yeah, Tara thought that, the Hare Krishnas had stolen her son from her. So I think she over exaggerated a little bit, but in a way she didn't exaggerate all that much, because I did sort of was a little bit insensitive and a little bit too distant when I was a brahmachari. And so unfortunately she passed away before I went back to college and grew out my hair and became a leader of Krishna West and started dressing in the kind of clothes she would be really proud that I wear. So she never got to see that, unfortunately. But anyway, let's go back to the verse here. I don't know why I got on that tangent. There's a good reason, but I forget. Oh yeah, ashes. Let this temporary body be burned to ashes, and let the air of life be merged with the totality of life, of air. Now, O my Lord, please remember all my sacrifices, right? Please remember all that I have done for you. So why is the devotee praying like that? And most of you got it right. There was no specific answer, but can I read to you?
Yeah.
Please.
Here we go. Let me share the screen to you. I'm surprised I don't know the reference. Shoot. You see this?
Yes.
I think maybe this is from the purport. The devotees develop a sense of love for Godhead by practicing devotional service to the Lord. Even if at the time of death the devotee does not remember his service to the Lord does not forget him. That's the whole point. So the devotee here is praying to Krishna, please remember me, because I know you remember me. Like, I know that's what you're known for that. You're known for remembering me, even if I can't remember you, right? Even if there's no such reminder, the Lord does not forget the service rendered by his pure devotee. And check this out. This is a really nice conversation with Prabhupada. Who wants to play the role of the devotee? I'll play the devotee, and who wants to play Prabhupada?
I'll play Prabhupada.
All right. So when somebody is dying and his external consciousness is completely absorbed in all kinds of terrible bodily symptoms, how is it that a devotee remembers Krishna? What is actually happening that he's able to remember Krishna?
Devotee generally remembers Krishna, but even if he cannot remember, Krishna will help him. That is guaranteed. Konteya, how do you say that? Konteya.
Who is Kaunteya?
Konteya.
Who's
Son
that?
of Kunti.
Yeah,
Arjuna.
right. Who? So you say he's the son of Kunti, so that's why he's called Kaunteya.
Konteya pratinjanihi na me bhakta pranesyasti. Because he is devotee for material condition, he could not remember. But Krishna remembers, yes, that he has done so much for me. Because Krishna has taken charge of him, even if he does not remember Krishna, still Krishna is there.
I carry what you lack, and
Yes, one should maintain his faith that Krishna will give me protection and my duty is to serve him. That's it.
let's go to 931. Let's go to 931. Yeah, actually, there's two verses here that Prabhupada refers to. 931. 931. Everyone's there?
Yeah.
Yes.
The last two lines are the what's important. Kaunteya pratijanihi na me bhakta pranashyati. Right? O son of Kunti, declare it boldly. That what?
My devotee never perishes.
Right. And we hear from Prabhupada and the Acharyas that Krishna is telling Arjuna, you tell the world, because I may change my, my word as I've done in the past and stuff. But if you declare it, you being my devotee, if you declare it, then I gotta follow suit, So that's why he's telling Arjuna, you tell it to the world that my devotee never perishes. And then coming back to that verse that we saw, the devotee says, I carry what you lack. What's that verse? Golokananda Priya?
Oh, I preserve what you have.
Yeah, that's a very famous verse. I forget the actual Sanskrit, but right, it's like, what does Krishna say there? To those who are, who always think of me, what does Krishna do to them?
Carry
Yes.
what you lack and preserve what you have.
Right. He preserves what they have and he sends that he gives them what they lack. So if at the time of death, like imagine, and that's what's so cool about bhakti, we're dealing with a person here who's really cool and rational and reasonable. Not like some robot, like, oh, sorry, like you did 48 years of devotional service, you chanted 16 rounds and followed the 4 regs, but the exact time of death, you were in an unconscious coma in a hospital, or you thought of something else. Oh, sorry, come again in your next birth, right? No. Declare it boldly, my devotee never perishes. And here, this is why I called Vignesh a little genius, because look, he gave this really, really cool reference to the Varaha Purana, where the Lord says, Tatastam riyamanam tu kashta pashana sanibham aham smarami mat bhaktam nayami paramam gatim. Jacob, here, read it.
I remember my devotee who is dying like wood and stone, without thoughts at that time, and take him to the spiritual world.
I mean, personally, that's a verse that applies to my Diksha Guru, to Bhakti Charuswami, because he passed away. We don't know, because he was in that stupid room with nobody could be around him, but apparently Prabhupada was chanting in the background, the hospital room. But here you've got this beautiful verse, right? I remember my devotee who is dying like wood and stone, right? Or like who's unconscious, and I take him to the spiritual world. So what really counts is what we do, right? And if at the exact moment of death, like also, what's his name? King Kulashekar, in his famous prayers, he sings, my dear Lord, at the time of death, my throat may be choked and I won't be able to utter your holy name, but please think of me, or please, now that I can, now that I'm chanting your holy name now, and please take account of that now, because maybe at the time of death I won't be able to, but we shouldn't worry like that. Krishna takes care of us. And so because he has this reputation of taking care of his devotee, because he's known for, carrying what the devotee lacks and preserving what they have, that's why we could say that's why the devotee here says, okay, let me die, let this body die, but, now that I'm dying, please remember all my sacrifices, right? And what does it mean that, being the... Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
About the other verse you were talking, it is 922.
920. 922. Can you read the translation?
Okay. But those who always worship me with exclusive devotion, meditating on my transcendental form, for them I carry what they lack and I preserve what they have.
Yes, good point. You couldn't have said it better. Okay, a little tricky question here about let's talk about two things, and then we'll be done. Let's talk about the Darwin issue with that statement by Prabhupada, and the Declaration of Independence issue, which Jacob, I have to say, answered perfectly. And again here, hey, you've got a teacher who's, very influenced by Hridayana Maharaj, because he thinks that sometimes he makes really brilliant historical, philosophical, cross philosophical points. And the question of the Declaration of Independence and the conclusions drawn by him, as Jacob described, because he probably listened to that lecture or those lectures and he's got it in his brain, I think is something we should all know, especially those of us who live in America or who are American citizens. Sorry, Sukumar, in your next life, if you pray hard enough. Totally joking.
I want to go home.
Yeah. Smart. Back to Godhead. But yeah, so let's go with the Darwin thing first. Some of you said that, this paragraph here, when the world was full of water, the living entity took on an aquatic form, then he passed on to vegetable life, from vegetable life to worm life, from worm life to bird life, from bird life to animal life, and from animal life to the human form. Now, the sort of the trap or the trick answer, the trick false answer, or I lay a trap here because the typical answer would be like, oh, well, that proves that, Darwin's wrong. Because as some of you explained, we believe in an evolution of the soul. Like the soul is the one that evolves, right? From one species to the other. And we do hear that all the species are created at the same time. So the species are there to begin with, and it's just the soul that evolves. Okay, but we also, to play the devil's advocate, we also hear from the Bhagavatam specifically how the material world is created, and there are particular stages, right? There are stages. And so that seems to contradict the idea that all species come exactly at the same time. And here, Prabhupada seems to justify that point by saying when the world was full of water, when you've got a world, and we hear that, right? I mean, that's stated in Shastra, the whole world is full of water. So when there's only water, you don't have vegetables. You don't have worm life. You don't have bird and animal life. So what does that tell us about? Basically, what I wanted to get at is the idea that many Christians share, the idea of intelligent design. That maybe there is a certain sort of an evolutionary, in the sort of the Darwinian point of view, minus natural selection and chance, but a sort of a guided evolution. And many devotees do accept that position. Not only is there this obvious reincarnation evolution that a soul, evolves from one body in a lower form of life to a more sophisticated form of life, body after body after body, but the bodies themselves may take some time to like one species may develop after. In other words, maybe devotees don't kick out completely out into the trash the entire Darwin idea. We would just say that, okay, if there is a sort of an evolution of a world, or let's say one species gets created after another, with, for example, the idea that first there's just water, so obviously there's only water species in there, but it's guided ultimately by Krishna. It's guided evolution. Anyone want to say anything on that?
I have a question.
Yes, Sukumari.
So is there no like reference in the Bhagavatam or somewhere else about how this actually happens in the sequence? To get some backup?
I don't know. That's a good question, and unfortunately,
okay.
I don't know the Bhagavatam that well, and I'm not so well versed on that topic. I had a roommate, Janaki Ram Prabhu, at the University of California in Santa Barbara, and then he did his PhD at Oxford on. He kind of changed, unfortunately, I would say, but his whole thing at first was, this whole meeting place between science and religion, and specifically the issue of evolution. So he would know more. There's a few devotees who wrote a couple books, right? There's some devotees out of Sweden who wrote, it's a BBT publication called, I forgot. Any of you? I tried to read it a couple times, but it just, for me, it doesn't not such a fascinating topic. I mean, it's important, but just I don't know. I'm sure there's verses in the Bhagavatam that talk about that, but does anyone know? Darwin, Bhaktivedanta. Let me just see which. I mean, are you really interested in reading about this?
Yeah, why not? I studied biology, so it's not like so far away from me.
Well, there's a book called Darwin and the Vedas. No, I forgot. I don't have it here. But there is Rethinking Darwin. There we go. Rethinking Darwin. Rethinking Darwin. And Druta Karma also, Prabhu. You know, Druta Karma has some. You've heard of Druta Karma, right? The famous Druta Karma. Who doesn't know Druta Karma, Prabhu?
I don't.
Huh?
I don't.
Druta Karma is a Prabhupada disciple who wrote if you're really interested in sort of a short book that talks about, again, like science and religion, it's called Human Devolution. That's a great.
I tried that one. It's all gibberish to me.
Really?
That's like so scientific, and then it's all in English. I'm like, okay, I'm done here. For me, at least. I mean, that's maybe somebody. Okay.
Druta Karma.
Maybe I just try it again. Maybe.
Human devolution, and that's a great human devolution, especially the last chapter. I mean, if I had any sort of like young students and who asked me like, what should I read? That last chapter of human devolution is short. It's like maybe 10 pages or something, not even. And it is so good in giving a basic picture of the whole thing, Oh, by the way, look, I just fell upon this. I want to show you this. This is totally off topic, but let me show you this. Let me stop sharing and share again. You see this? Exponential. Become a multiplying church. Your future starts now. So this is a non-denominational Christian, evangelical Christian organization that has like 3 meetings per year, like conventions, one on the West Coast, one on the East Coast, Midwest. Actually, they have 5 now. And I went to one like maybe 5 years ago. On the West Coast one, it was at a big mega church near Laguna Beach, where actually it was Kobe Bryant's church. And these dudes just floored me. I mean, you have these top pastors from all over the country, and they're giving like sermons and keynote speeches in this auditorium, this super cool modern auditorium where they have their services with a huge LCD screen and like soft rock musicians doing their we love Jesus bhajans, and then across the street from that is like the biggest building in this like 4-building huge property, and that biggest building of them all is the children's building. Like they invested most of their money in a children's building, like how much they care for their children. The first floor is like kindergarten, second floor is like 4th grade to 6th grade, and 3rd floor is middle school, and top floor is like high school. And have vetted, Christian teachers who are professional teachers, and screen for any sort of pedophile propensities or whatever. And I was just like, when I went there, I was like, oh my God. And so they rent a mega church 5 times a year, and then they invite all these key teachers. And the whole theme is exponential, like how to multiply your church. And they give you a catalog this thick. And if you go to room 23, on the 3rd floor or whatever, and you have all these seminars, you can go to workshops, how to start a ministry among, retired, 60 to 65-year-old Vietnamese women in Pomona, or how to do a softball Christian club, how to preach to Harley Davidson alcoholics. I mean, just like the specificity of the kind of workshops they offer is just mind-boggling, and they don't know Rupa Goswami, they don't know the concept of Yukta Vairagya, but boy, do they know how to do Yukta Vairagya. So I mean, I would recommend every ISKCON leader in North America and in Western Europe, probably more in Western Europe than in America, to go to these workshops, to go to these exponential conventions, because you come out of there, you have to tolerate a lot of and Jesus died on the cross and and all that sort of kind of annoying evangelical theology. But when you just filter the theology and you see how organized and fired up they are to grow their church, not even grow, to multiply. That's the whole point. So we're not even growing, we're multiplying. It's really humbling and mind-blowing. Anyway, sorry for that little I wanted to show you, human devolution. I mean, we've got this amazing theology, guys. We have this amazing theology, and we're just in the process of basically unpacking it. I mean, we don't even need to unpack it that much. I mean, yeah, we do. We have a huge job of unpacking the theology, but the freaking marketing sucks. And we're only getting the Indian diaspora and a few people who were Indians in their past lives. And it's just not enough, Like in North America, I mean, I don't want to rant here, but I'll speak 5 more minutes. Like in America, and not, obviously you want everybody to come forward to Krishna. Like, we're not racist in any way. So any soul in anybody comes through a door of an ISKCON center or brings Krishna and Prabhupada into their life, they're glorious. They're glorious. They're using their human form of life to what they're supposed to, we believe, and they're glorious. So the fact that there's thousands and thousands of members of the Indian diaspora coming forward and becoming Vaishnavas, becoming pure Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis is wonderful, hands down. At the same time, it's not mutually exclusive. At the same time, we have a problem in North America. And we're starting to see it in Europe as well. And what is that problem? The problem is that you have a percentage of the congregation that is Indian that is way, 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 way higher than the demographics of the country. You get my point. Like in America, I studied this a little bit a couple of years ago. In America, I mean, I just did a little 10-minute search on Google. The percentage, the Indian diaspora constitutes 1% to 3%, depending on different studies. The Indian diaspora, that means people from, who immigrated from India, regardless of whether they're Hindus, Vaishnavas, or Muslims, or whatever, is about 1% to 3% of the whole entire American population, okay? So if we in ISKCON were doing things right in terms of outreach in North America, in the best of worlds, at, for example, the Sadhu Sangha Festival. Anyone been at the Sadhu Sangha Festival in North Carolina? Did you go to Lakananda Priya?
Yeah, I went a couple times.
Isn't it wonderful?
Yeah.
They devotees rent out Shri Shri Ravi Shankar's Art of Living headquarters, I think, in the Appalachian Mountains in North Carolina.
Beautiful place.
It's a huge temple room, like huge, sort of like basically concert hall, and all these chalets around where devotees rent out their rooms, and the thing is sold out like within the website actually freezes because as soon as they open registration, it's sold out in a few hours. There's like 5,000 or 4,000 devotees every year. And, the best kirtaniya has really good prasadam, great mood. And there's, let's say, 4,000 devotees who go there. Now, in America, as I said, the Indian diaspora constitutes, let's say, 2.5% of the human population. Then you've got whatever, 40. Let's just look. I'm interested because I don't want to tell a lie. Like demographics, US population, okay? So, access denied. Demographics in the United States. It would be interesting to know about. Okay, whites. So whites, it's about 75% whites. No, that's not possible. 53%. Oh yeah, okay, so it's 75% whites, 16% blacks, 7% Asian Pacific Islanders. You see 1.1% American Indian. And then what about the Latinos? Well, anyway, you get my point. Whatever it is, there's 100% population, right? And out of that 100% population, it's divided. It's like a cake divided, okay? So let's say whites are X percent and Indians are 1 to 3%. Now, if we were doing our job in terms of reaching out to all the different communities, ethnic communities in North America, at a festival like the Sadhu Sangha Festival, which is our biggest festival of the year, we would, in the best of worlds, see out of those, let's say 4,000 devotees, 1 to 3% Indians. And then, the same percentage as in America of whites there, and the Latinos, the exact representation just on a micro level, right? But with the same percentages, correct? Unfortunately, and again, this is not a criticism of the Indian devotees there, they're glorious, but unfortunately, and it's also to their credit, we could say, because Indians are closer to the Vedas in a way, because, they come from there and Krishna appeared there and there's more facility and whatever the reason is, the fact is, when you go to the Sadhu Sangha Festival and just with your eyes, you just kind of stare, it's at least 95% devotees, glorious Vaishnavas from Indian background. So you get my point. So in a country where the percentage of a particular ethnic community is 1 to 3%, you have the biggest national festival of the year, and that specific ethnicity is represented at 95+%. Right? Now, again, I don't know how we got to that point, but back to human devolution. Okay, let's finish with the Declaration of Independence. I'm sorry for having hopped back and forth a little kind of everywhere, but these are important points I think we should consider. Can we go? Yeah.
So what can you do just to change it?
Well, that's a great question. That's a
this
great
talk
question.
has been going on for so long about Indian mostly, but
Well, you already see.
Krishna ways.
Yeah, you already see those centers or those temples, those communities in North America itself, or in New Zealand also, or in Australia, or in England, anywhere where there's a very high Indian diaspora. Invariably, and this totally is backed up by the trends that have been studied in a very systematic way by historians and sociologists of religion for the last 100, 200 years, observing these specific details in the preaching efforts of the Catholic Church and the Christians. And I mean, these things have been studied for 100 years, 200 years. And what's happening already now, which I'll just describe in ISKCON North America, is exactly what's been seen already in other religious traditions. And that is that when you have two religious groups, let's say two communities, let's say group A and group B, and then group A has religion X and group B has religion Y, okay? The more cultural differences there are, so in terms of dress, in terms of food, recipes, in terms of musical instrumentation, in terms of architecture, interior design, the more external cultural differences there are between group A and group B, the harder it is for people of group B to adopt the religion of people of group B, of group A, and then to accept the religion of group B. Conversely, the less cultural differences there are, or the more similarities there are, culturally speaking, so similar recipes, similar dress, similar musical instruments, similar interior design, similar architecture, similar language. The more similarities there are, the easier it is, radically it is, for people of group A to adopt the religion of people of group B. That's a formula that's been tested and proved, and I would die immediately if it was wrong. Like, it's invariably, it's been seen again and again and again. And we already see it in the little short lifespan of ISKCON. You know, I like to use the example of, for example, of Los Angeles, where, you know, you have a temple which, you know, is wonderful in many ways, but has, let's say, a very sort of culturally Indian approach, and especially in terms of the dress, starting with the leaders, the Grihastha leaders. And you go on a Sunday program, and again, it's all the souls who are there are glorious. You know, we admire them, we offer obeisances to them, but you look at the demographics, largely Indian. And you drive down on Venice Boulevard about 2 miles down on a Thursday or a Friday, and you go to the mantra house, where the leaders are dressed in pants and shirt, nice and clean, modest. The prasad is, you know, is veggie burgers or whatever. Large majority are Latinos, whites, African Americans, Asians, hands down, in the same city. Same thing in Paris. In Paris, we have this group of wonderful devotees who are doing a preaching center inside Paris called the Yoga Lyrique, lyrical yoga. That's how they call their center. And it's as big as it's actually smaller than 26 2nd Avenue. And their approach is very much local culture, local dress, local food. And they're actually getting a lot of local Parisians, like local French people from, you know, again, whites, some blacks, some Russians, some blacks. And you go to the temple where the beautiful deities of Radha Parishishwara, I mean, they're controlling, so I guess they've decided to go there. It's like this neighborhood outside of Paris called Sarcelles. And you go there on a Sunday, and again, the souls there are glorious, but externally speaking, you're not in Paris, you are in Dhaka, Bangladesh. Like 99% of the devotees at the Sunday Feast Kirtan are from Bangladesh, right? And some of them, you know, are and are initiated and are chanting their rounds, and you can see they're super Vaishnavas, you know, wonderful devotees. But ethnically, because the leaders there stress the Indian, you know, the Indian recipes and the Indian dress and all that. So to answer your question, Golokananda Priya, you know, Rupa Goswami, we'll see this when we get to the Nectar of Devotion. Rupa Goswami in chapter 6 of Nectar of Devotion makes it clear that there's things called principles that we cannot, you know, alter, or we cannot change, we can't mess with, and there are details. And the details have to do with time, place, and circumstance. And time, place, and circumstance is a principle that is emphasized over and over and over again, even in the Bhagavatam, right? Billy Graham, you're from North Carolina. Go looking on Priya. You heard of Billy Graham? It'll be a great sin if you never heard of Billy Graham. Well, Billy Graham, Sukumar, for your information to prepare you for your next birth. Billy Graham is.
That's not no.
Okay.
Not funny. Don't like it.
All right.
Not needed. Okay.
Well, Billy Graham, for your information, is known as the most famous Christian evangelical preacher in the history of the United States. And he made this fantastic statement, which I think is fantastic, called anchored to the rock, geared to the times. Have you heard that one before? Any of you?
I haven't heard it, but.
And it is a rock.
Anchored, you know, like an anchor from a boat?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're anchored to the rock and you're geared to the times. So in other words, the principles, our theology, our basic practice, our sadhana, our principles, our four regulative principles, our chanting of the Maha Mantra, our accepting the conclusions of the Bhagavatam and Prabhupada's commentaries, and that's the rock, and we're anchored to that. and we don't move, the boat doesn't move an inch because it's anchored to that. But we are geared, just like, in America, we drive with automatic stick shift, but as Sukumari would know, in Europe, we drive with a stick shift, and you've got different gears. So you're geared to the times. You're geared to the times. And so that's the answer to your question. And then, that is the whole issue of, that's the challenge for the decades and centuries to come on the preaching front of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness.
Can I ask a quick question there?
Yep.
So then I wondered about the conclusion. So we mix it up in the temples and centers, or we just throw out the dhoti and sari, or we mix it up? Because if we throw those out, then the Indians will get weirded out.
No, they don't get weirded out. I think that's a false, with all due respect, I think that's a false, that's a false.
It's just a thought.
It's a good thought, but some devotees propose that, and I don't agree. And the reason is because if, you see, Bhagavad-Gita used to tell me, everybody wants to be on a winning team. Like everybody wants to be, and if you're going to join a team, you want to join the Los Angeles Lakers. You don't want to join or if you want to join, football, if you don't want to join the New York Jets, you want to join I'm not, you see how Krishna conscious I am? I don't even know which team they're so good. So, Indians who come to America, if they join a religious organization that is Hindu-based or Vedic-based or Vaishnava, that is actually really successful, that has tons of well-to-do, educated local Americans, right, who are influencing the world and who are like flourishing spiritually in this community, that's a winning team. That's all the more reason for them to join that community. And paradoxically, most of the Indians who come to our temples, they come in Western clothes anyway, especially the men, right? So this idea that but ultimately, I believe there should be a freedom of choice policy, a freedom of choice. And then, of course, how you dress is up to you. Only the individual can decide. And so ultimately, it really is an individual decision, and each individual center will do what the leaders want to do, But so I think there should be, the principle is, dress however you want, offer the kind of prasadam you want to the public, use the kind of musical instruments that you think are best, have people sit in pews or on the floor on mats as you think is best, have them come in with shoes or not with shoes as you think is best, etc., etc. And that freedom of choice must be there, especially for congregation members, in terms of, for example, how they dress. But then in terms of leadership, it's a question of opinion and what strategy. And some devotees may, disagree on what is the best strategy. At age 48, and having, studied these things academically and having seen it and experienced it by my own life, I'm convinced that, that formula between group A and group B, and the rate of conversion between people of group A adopting the religion of group B based on more or less cultural differences or similarities, I'm convinced that's just a scientific sort of rule, just as much as gravity is a rule in this world, And it's up to the individuals to do what they want and who they want to cater to also. Some temples, they really want to cater to the Indian community, for example. So maybe it may be wise for them indeed to wear, dhotis and saris, like the Bhaktivedanta Manor, for example, So it depends who you're catering to, which community you're serving. Prabhus, do you mind if we overgo by 5 minutes and deal with this the Declaration of Independence thing? It won't take long, but it's really important. I think that you Prabhus you should understand, get this point. Are you okay? We'll probably run over by 5 minutes. Okay. Sukumar, can you read the question number 4?
1 second. Okay, the Declaration of Independence in the USA states that all men are created equal. Srila Prabhupada states, the intelligent man sees oneness not in the variety of the bodies, but in the spiritual identity. How would you harmonize Srila Prabhupada's statement with this sentence from the Declaration of Independence? And if Srila Prabhupada's recommendation, that means about seeing oneness, is true, what implications does this recommendation have on this passage from the Declaration of Independence?
Jacob, could I ask you to read your answer? Because I think you nailed it.
Sure.
Everybody listen to Jacob here, because I think this is what I was looking for.
Of course, the credit goes to His Holiness Hridayananda Das Goswami.
Sure.
Anyways, Prabhupada explains that though our bodies and material qualifications may vary, we are all naked before God and intimately connected to one another through our relationship with Him. It is this equality which the Declaration of Independence is referring to, and which the United States justice system and democracy itself recognizes as a foundational principle. This implies that some of the values which civilized societies hold most dear are metaphysical, and therefore we exist in a bidimensional universe, and to claim that there is nothing beyond the physical is a fundamental misunderstanding of reality.
Obviously, there's dissimilarities among humans and other creatures in this world. Let's just take humans. Some woman is just more beautiful than another. Some man is just faster or stronger than another. One person is a lot richer than another. One person is a lot more intelligent than another. One person is a lot poorer than another, etc., etc., etc. So this sort of inequality or difference on the material platform, who can deny that, right? Who can deny that? Now, we believe we're souls in material bodies, right? That's what we believe from the Bhagavad-Gita. So when the founders of America, and it's Thomas Jefferson, right? If I'm not mistaken. When Thomas Jefferson writes, every man is created equal, it's empirically impossible that he's referring to the physical body, because we are not created equal. Again, somebody is created richer than the other, someone is more beautiful, someone is more intelligent, someone is less fast, etc., etc. So what does that imply? Well, as Jacob aptly points out, repeating Hridayananda Maharaj, that implies that we live in a bidimensional reality, that there's a material reality and then there's a metaphysical or a spiritual reality, and that the equality that we are all, taking very seriously and, respecting and idealizing must be, by definition, a spiritual equality, because the soul in that poor person is equal to the soul in that rich person, and is equal to the soul in that beautiful woman's body, and is equal to the body of that really fat guy, and is equal to the pauper in the street. The soul, you get my point? And then you expand that to the animal species, and then you get to that verse, Vidya Vinaya Sampane, Paramaniga Veheshtini Suni Chaiva Svapake Cha Pandita Samadarshina 5:18 from the Gita, where a wise person sees with equal vision a dog eater, a Brahman, an outcast, and so on. So this vision of equality not only is metaphysical, but we as followers of Krishna, we would say that applies even to trans-species. Like it's a trans-species kind of vision, not just within the human species, but just even within the human species. The implication, as Jacob aptly pointed out, is that if we are going to talk about equality, and in France they have the same thing, égalité, fraternité, I always forget the third one, fraternité, égalité, liberté, égalité, fraternité, this liberty and equality, the same thing, equality. Well, that equality must by definition be the equality on the soul, on the platform of the soul. And therefore, what's the conclusion, the implication, as Jacob said, that even though there's so many atheists out there who say, no, there's no soul, there's no God, no. Well, the very legal system, the very core of civilization is based on this premise, at least if they respect these notions of equality, right? That we live in a bidimensional reality, a spiritual reality inside a material body's reality, kind of thing. Do you like it?
Yeah.
Deep, huh? All right, Prabhus. Well, we're over time by 3 minutes, so we'll stop now. Next week, you're gonna have to put on your acting hats and do some sort of debate with Madhavendra Puri about Mayavadis, and I think this should be fun.
If Vignesh is coming.
Pardon me?
If Vignesh is coming.
If Vignesh is coming.
Yeah, because he is playing Mayavadi and me, and then I don't want to be alone on this one, you know.
You already have the roles, huh? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And then we hit the Bhagavad-Gita, which should be long. It's going to be the longest module among them all by far, but in one way the most important, right? So
when are we going to end next year? By the end of next year?
Yeah, I told you it's like, let's say a year and a half, a year and a half-ish. But don't worry, your diploma will look really beautiful with gold leaves on it, and you can show it to your children.
Yeah, because now Mother Urmila, he's giving it for only like 8 months or something.
Yeah, but they do almost twice as many hours a week as we do. So you see, they do a 3 or 4 hour meeting, whereas we do 2. So,
okay.
but money back guaranteed, and if you want to go to our competition, you're more than welcome. It's funny because we're also operating out of North Carolina, out of Hillsboro. Like officially, it's called Krishna West Center for Bhagavad Studies, but it's according to the. Huh?
I'm just telling you that.
Yeah.
I just saw
Fantastic teacher.
ad. They have a Bhakti Sastri for 8 months.
Yeah, but they do like 3 or 4 hours, so that's why we're a third longer. So, but hopefully it's tolerable for all of us, and we'll be happy at the end, by having gone through Prabhupada's books and getting that nice degree, and right. At least I pray that it is so.
Prabhu, just before we end here, I just wanted to express my gratitude. I get a lot out of these classes, and I really appreciate your perspective and the Krishna West kind of spin on things. Here in Tucson, unfortunately, the temple, with all its very wonderful things, sometimes the ideas aren't as open-minded, I guess you could say. And we actually, Sorel and I are part of an initiative of a few devotees who are going to be doing a Krishna West style group that we're calling the Tucson Bhakti Collective. And it's kind of being spearheaded by Damodar Swarup Prabhu, who you might know, he was from Philadelphia. Anyways, we plan to use everything that we've been learning in classes and things that we are planning for the general public, and so we really appreciate the time that you spend, and yeah, it's Krishna's hand is very obviously in this for us. We really appreciate you being an instrument.
Thank you, bro. That's very encouraging. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you on that wonderful note. We'll end here, and just if any of you want to do a little 5-minute or maybe 30-second or short little video, and then do it on your cell phone, send it to me, and then I'll incorporate it into a little slightly larger video, so I can already make publicity for the next module. I'd be grateful.
Yeah.
Sure.
All right, Prabhus. My obeisances, happy Janmashtami, happy Prabhupada Vyasa Puja, and we'll see each other in a couple of weeks.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Hare Krishna.
Krishna.
Thank you.